Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to this meeting a bit early in the morning, in the end of June. So we are happy to welcome you to our joint event by CEPS and the Center for the Study of Democracy. So new energy governance to address Europe's energy and climate security. Lessons from the Kremlin Playbook. And of course, like this topic could not be less timely these days. So already in 2021, in the late 2021, we had a profound energy price crisis, which spread up from the gas markets towards electricity across Europe, and of course, following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February 2022. So Europe is facing a lot of challenges, and the first and foremost, of course, is how to deal with upcoming winter and probable escalation of maybe further cuts of gas supplies and further onwards. And in the end, like in the longer term, of course, the biggest question is how to combine security of supply issues and not to divert, not to deviate from the path towards climate neutrality, energy transition, and to keep the European Green Deal objectives fulfilled and not deviated. So today we will have a very interesting discussion on these issues. And before we start, I would like also to pass the floor to Ruslan Stefanov, Program Director of the Center for the Study of Democracy. He will do also opening remarks. Please, Ruslan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina, and good morning everyone in the room and everyone on the screens. Thanks a lot to the Center for European Policy Studies for hosting us today, and we look forward to a really interesting discussion. I will just start by saying that in the last 7 years, whenever we've been talking about the Kremlin playbook, I've gotten one of the same questions, particularly in the capitals of Europe, in Berlin, in Paris, and it's always been, is what Russia is doing an opportunity or a strategy? Well, I think now we've got pretty much the idea, what we are up to. But I still think we haven't quite figured out what we could do to actually wean ourselves off dependence on Russia's fossil fuels and also Russia's malign influence in Europe. And this is another event that we are trying to help out and develop tools that will help us in the future preempt, see what's coming on us, because this is not going to be the end of dependence on authoritarian regimes elsewhere in the world and our energy security independence. And also, we should not forget the energy trilemma. When we're thinking about sustainability and competitiveness, we should not forget that we also have the security of supply and energy security issues, which are pretty complex. So today, I'm really happy that my colleagues from the Energy and Climate Program at CSD are rolling out or presenting a draft of a beta version of an energy and climate security risk index, which we hope will give us an idea early on or in real times, how the energy security situation of the different countries in Europe change and what does this mean in terms of policy action, so that we know better, who will do what in the coming days. And the second things that I wanted to say in my opening and finish up with this, I think we need to really focus on two issues that haven't been spoken much about. One is governance, is how we're going to make sure to ensure that our understanding of this commission that it should be more geopolitical could actually work out, because there are different capacities in the different member states to implement complex Green Deal, REPowerEU, and standoff to Russia policies. And second, going back to the Kremlin playbook, we need to still, the corporate networks that Russia built in the past 30 years within Europe are still there. And we need to figure out how we know that they're not interfering with our policy making. And in that respect, I'm particularly happy that today also we have among us, among the speakers, the Melanie Kennedy from the Energy Futures Initiative, who I think as a partner from the US, we should rely still a lot on securing Europe's long-term geopolitical interests. And I look forward to the presentations today, because I still think Europe is not yet there in terms of geopolitical capacity. And I still remember the Nabucco pipeline, which might have been online today if we had a little bit more foresight. And I'd like to finish up with that. I look forward to a really great presentation, and turn it over to our great host and moderator today, Christian Egerhofer from the Center for European Policy Analysis. Christian.
Thank you. You're raising the bar. Yeah, then also a welcome from the moderator to the people in the room, and especially our distinguished panelists. My name is Christian Egenhofer. I'm Associate Senior Research Fellow here at CEPS and Senior Associate at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute in Florence. Everybody has already mentioned sort of the framing, what's going on. So let me not repeat this, and we have very knowledgeable and distinguished speakers who are much better in it than me. But you mentioned the governance, and the issues underlying there is the decoupling of Russian fossil fuels, especially gas. What does it mean for politics and economics? And we'll be experiencing it, some of it, but also from the economic side. Some of you have been recently in Berlin, I guess. you got a bit of a feeling how the debate there goes. So let me just jump right into the debate. We have about a little bit more than 1 hour. And so we would like to make it as interactive as possible, as dynamic as possible. We have asked the speakers for 7 minutes each introductory presentation. We will give a possibility for question of clarification, but then let's go into the debate. If the speakers agree, let's just, all the others just jump on it immediately and say, can you clarify, I disagree, without sort of completely jumping the order, but just to get going. There will be questions from the audience, and I can see people already wrinkling their forehead. But there is also people in the YouTube who will also bring questions, and we will bring that into the debate. Now, let me then just introduce, if you allow me, we just introduce all of you at once, so we have them all at one go. But before that, just for the sake of housekeeping, if you don't mind, whenever you participate in the debate, can you just briefly mention your name again? Because we haven't really figured out how we can make name tags and nameplates visible on YouTube. And then sometimes you listen to these things. I am one of these persons who sometimes listen to the YouTube recordings, and then you don't know, you just want to go into 20 minutes, and then you don't know who is who. So if you each time just mention your name again, and then people can trace you on the program.
If my answer's bad, I'm going to say Sam is my name.
Sorry?
If my answer is bad, I'm going to use his name.
Yeah, I mean, practically I would maybe it's more credible if you use her name than his. But it's a good try, I mean. Oh, I mean, yeah. No. Then, we have first Konstanza Rangolova, who has, who works for the center. He has been undertaking this work, and before she has been working in the gas sector, gas analyst in Vienna. So she is a gas person, if I may say that, or she was a gas person. She used to be a gas person, and you may have jumped to another topic maybe too quickly. Gas is back, and many people hadn't thought that. Then, of course, we have Melanie Kendradine, who is known to many of you, if not all of you. She's at the Energy Futures Initiatives, and she has a very long-standing career in many US administrations and also in the Department of Energy. And if I may say so, you're a Washington insider, so that's always helpful in many respects for the debate and for many other parts. Then we have Jean Hautcotu, who is at SHAPE. He is the person dealing with that issue at SHAPE, and I think that probably sums it up. Okay, you're nodding, so I must be right. And then Radan Kanev, he's in the Environment Committee in the European Parliament. And yeah, he's now very busy with the European Green Deal, Fit for 55, etc., which is one of the issues, what is going to happen in the current situation with the Fit for 55. So keen to hear on this. We have a very strong sort of Bulgarian presence, unusually sort of high representation of Bulgarian presence. I don't know whether there's a coincidence with the instability through the fall of the Bulgarian government is with this. Maybe we can also cover this. Radan, if you want to, or whoever wants to speak about this. Now, let me stop here, and I just give the floor to Constanza. You have the slides, which will be loaded in a second. They will be coming, and now you can show them. So, Constanza. 7 minutes.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. Hello, everyone. So without losing too much time in introducing the topic, indeed, I will be talking about energy and climate security in Europe in the context of decoupling from Russia's economic and political influence in Europe. The Center for the Study of Democracy has spent the last 8 years in very much detail studying how Russia has been influencing European economic and political decision-making through a vast network of economic and political actors across Europe, not just in Central and Eastern Europe, which are more famous and known for that, but also in Germany and Italy, in Belgium, all over Europe. And these networks of influence have been used to undermine European energy security and decarbonization goals. And indeed, energy has been a key feature of Russian influence in Europe because of the close to 40,000 companies that we uncovered in Russian companies active in Europe. 80% are energy focused. 150 companies, they're holding 80% of all of the money flowing into Europe from these companies. So energy is definitely a very big issue when it comes to Russian influence all across Europe. And energy security has become a key issue, mostly because we are now starting to realize that Russia was not our friend, and it was not just business. And in fact, we were set up for a trap, and we need to very quickly start to better understand how Russia is influencing decision-making in Europe and what makes our energy security and what we need to do. And which is why we developed the Energy and Climate Security Risk Index, because in Europe we have 27 new member states with very different energy mixes and policies, but at the same time we do try to have common goals and achieve very similar things, which is geopolitical stability, affordability of energy, security of supply, and of course decarbonization and sustainability. And there are a lot of common ways to assess how well different countries are performing in terms of these goals, and which is why we have these 4 pillars of the index, which focus on these 4 key topics. And we try to assess in a very comparable way how different countries are doing in terms of their energy and climate security. So we look at how much money is being spent on energy per GDP or per capita. We look at CO2 emissions of the different countries. We look at energy efficiency measures, different pricing aspects, and we try to put that together into a one index that shows how are they doing and how do they compare. And the index has been piloted for Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, Italy, and Germany, and we do have a European benchmark against which we compare. So here we have the results for Italy and Germany. So the key index would be the black line, which is the energy and climate security overall risk. And we have its four subcomponents, which are geopolitical risk, affordability, reliability, etc. And what we can see very clearly from this chart is that we have two very similar developments. Up until 2021, we have a gradual increase of geopolitical risk in both Italy and Germany, which is the blue line that you see on the charts. And we have a severe spike of affordability risks, especially in 2021, and you can even imagine how much worse it has become so far in 2022, which is the red line. And this is very strongly connected to our dependence on fossil fuels, and in particular Russian fossil fuels. And I will go into a little bit more detail about what makes up the geopolitical risk, and especially in the case of the Europe and Italy and Germany in particular. A big component of the geopolitical risk index is the security of natural gas imports of these countries. And you can see here on the left side of the chart how the index for security of natural gas imports looks for Italy, Germany, and the European Union. And you can see how since the annexation of Crimea, we have a big increase of the risk. And this is related to the gradual increase of imports of Russian gas. And both Italy and Germany have increased significantly the share of Russian gas in their total gas imports since the annexation of Crimea, despite all of the warning signs that we had, despite Russia becoming ever more aggressive in its foreign policy. And you can see how this has led to an overall increase on the European level as well, because the European line, the blue line, which shows the security of natural gas imports in Europe, also has increased. And on the right side of the chart, you can even see how Italy and Germany alone account for about half of all natural gas imports from Russia in Europe. And they also account for half of the increase we have seen between 2014 and 2020. So we have currently a situation where by 2020, we were close to 40% dependent on Russia for our gas, and Italy and Germany were in fact 50% dependent on Russian gas by that time. But this dependence on fossil fuels, and especially Russian fossil fuels, has other implications for affordability and for sustainability. And this is why we're looking here at energy expenditures per GDP for the same countries and for the EU. So this is, on this chart, you can see how many euros in 2019 prices every country has been paid for every 1,000 euros of its GDP. And you can see how that coincides very closely with crude oil prices, which is the black dotted line. So we still have the prices of oil and gas strongly influencing how much energy, how much we are spending on energy on the European level per GDP, and how still dependent our economies are on fossil fuels. And considering how much Russia has played into the spike of fossil fuel prices over the past several months, you can see also how this dependence also plays out into basically Russia being able to influence fossil fuel markets and economic performance in Europe. And just a brief mention about CO2 costs. And I would like to point your attention to the bar charts, which show how much we spend on oil and natural gas imports, which is the yellow bars, and how much per GDP we're spending on CO2. And you can see how CO2 costs have definitely increased strongly, but they are negligible compared to how much we spend on oil and gas imports. And finally, just a few words about Russia's influence in Europe and how this is being done, because understanding how Russia is achieving this economic and political influence in Europe is crucial for decoupling from Russia. And we have spent a lot of time in trying to really dissect the Kremlin strategy and its playbook in Europe. And we can see how we have a very deep financial penetration of Russian companies. We have joint projects between European and Russian energy companies, which serve to really entangle political and business interests in strategic projects that actually undermine European energy security. And we can see how that plays out in Russia owning gas storages in Germany and emptying them just before the war in Ukraine. We can see it in strategic projects such as the Nord Stream pipelines and the Turk Stream pipeline. And this has been done legally and exploiting governance loopholes in Europe that have allowed this to happen. So we do need to make sure that we tackle this financial penetration and we have better monitoring and control measures to prevent and decouple from this Russian influence. So how do we move forward? Of course, by now it's very clear that we need to decouple from Russia, and we need to do that as fast as possible and strategically. And stopping imports and business relations with Russia is really key for making this happen. But we also need a full natural gas phase out by 2035, and at the same time an uptake of green hydrogen to make sure that the energy transition and renewable energy lead to an independent European Union from an energy perspective going forward. We also need to really focus on energy efficiency and focus attention there, because it seems that at the moment attention is focusing mostly on short-term measures on LNG and natural gas infrastructure, while very little attention is being paid to the actual primary source of energy, which is saved energy. And we also need to focus on going forward and defining a very clear pathway to 2050 and sticking to that point. So we need a very clear plan about what we need to do and how we need to achieve it, and to monitor how different countries are performing relative to these goals, which is why we need a monitoring tool that is very easy for policymakers to use. And finally, we need strategic communication to tackle Kremlin narratives that are trying to undermine the European Green Deal and actually blame the current crisis on the European Green Deal and the European Union itself, and focusing the blame away from itself. And with that, I would like to wrap up and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for this. I don't know whether there are any questions of clarification. It was clear to me, but there may be some points. It doesn't seem to be the way. Just one thing I would, when you saw your list, we're not going to enter in a debate. I think there is a big implication on your second index part, the affordability. Some of the stuff you mentioned is not cheap. And so let's discuss this. Melanie, you will be the next.
Okay, and waiting for the slides to come up, you did mention that I had worked for several administrations in the United States. I did not work for the Trump administration. I just want to make that clear. I worked for the Clinton administration for 8 years at the Department of Energy, and for the Obama administration for 4 years. And my office is the office that supported the first Kremlin Playbook. It was so impactful. Senator Whitehouse, a senator from Connecticut or somewhere, never remember, took it to the floor of the Senate and held it up and said, if you haven't read this book, you need to read it. And shortly thereafter, we found out that the Russians had hacked John Podesta's emails. And my staff said, oh no, John Podesta's emails have him talking about my office's quadrennial energy review. And I thought I was going to read something horrible, and it was good. Okay, but that's how far they went in that election, in the Trump-Clinton election, and fully demonstrating the Clinton playbook. And I would like to say on your slides, the last list of things, everyone wants those. They are costly, they are problems in some areas of the world, and it would be great if we could all do them. I don't think that that's possible. So, and I'll say a little bit about this. Just a few points. This is U.S. LNG by vessel and pipeline, and only the differences between 2018 and 2020. I'm going to show you 2021 and 22. I didn't have those data available when I made this. And green is 2020, blue 2018. Mexico, you can see, went down, substantially went down in their LNG imports from the United States, went down as a percentage and went down substantially in volume. Caribbean, up in volume, down as a percentage. Central and South America, up in volume, down as a percentage. Here's why. Look at Europe. In 2 years, Europe went from 155,000 MCF to 917, and this is before Ukraine. So Europe clearly needs gas, and the U.S. has been providing it a lot. Middle East down a little bit. Asia down as a percentage, up in volume, but it's a percentage down because of how much Europe has gone up. And I mentioned Mexico. Mexico's LNG imports went down, but their pipeline imports from the U.S. have gone way up. And that is same for Canada as well. And we didn't sign anything allowing LNG exports until Secretary Moniz was secretary in 2013. This is what's happened over that period of time. And here, those are the percentages increase, and you're going to look there and look at your 492% increase in a 2-year period. So Asia up substantially, not as high a percentage, but up by a huge amount. The numbers between 2018 and 2021, U.S. LNG exports to Europe went up 682%. You got 492% there. 682% adding 1 year, okay, went up 682%. And this last year, 2022, it's gone up 66% more. So it has gone so much up into Europe that our Asian allies are calling me up going, we need your gas too. Do not forget about us. And so I think we need to be mindful of that as well. Message here, Europe needs our gas. They needed our gas before Russia. And now it's really, really a huge energy security issue. I'm going to skip through these because our moderator is making faces at me to hurry up. This is important for Europe as well. These are approved North American LNG export terminals. You can see up at the top, FERC approved and under construction. And President Biden said yesterday they are going to expedite those approved facilities under construction. That's important, okay, but there's a whole bunch of FERC approved not under construction. I think we need to be expediting those over the next 3 years. This is not going to be over with by the end of the year. And so I think we need to be expediting. Getting FERC approval is not easy. And so it's 26, 27 BCF a day. And so when I look at these numbers and I looked at globally existing import facilities that are existing or under construction, 1,102 metric tons per annum. Under construction export facilities, 576 metric tons per annum. We need to not let Russia fill that void in any way, shape, or form. And so LNG exporters need to be working night and day to fill the gap between import and export facilities. About 50% of that planned capacity could be met with those FERC approved and not under construction. So I'm going to switch gears here. I'm going to switch all over the world, okay, and which I've been doing for the last 3 days. This is from a study we did of California. It was a technology study, not a policy study. We assumed their policies on climate, and what technologies did they need to meet them. And what you are seeing there, every day of the year, actual wind and solar generation for those days in that year. Solar is red, wind is blue. The numbers you see coming up there, 90 days in 1 year with little to no wind. Okay, there are 10 days in a row with little to no wind. I've also gone through and counted. There are 2 or 3 weeks there with little to no solar, and there are several weeks where the solar and wind combined do not meet peak. Our conclusion from this is that you need a fuel. And right now that fuel is gas. It could be hydrogen in the future. Everyone's interested in that. Right now the fuel is gas. And battery storage, that's California's battery storage there. It was 2019. They've purchased a lot more, but nothing like the 90 days with no wind. Battery storage is 4 hours. DOE has a program for long duration storage that's 10 hours, and it's linear. If you need 8 hours from 4-hour battery, you have to buy 2 batteries. Okay, and so it's problematic. Those are the numbers there. They had 502 megawatt hours of battery storage in 2019. Their total generation in that year was 202,000 megawatts. Again, long duration storage is a breakthrough technology. We are not there yet. We are not close to there yet. DOE is funding billions of dollars for 10-hour storage. So we need to be very mindful for this at this point in time, for the foreseeable future, you need a fuel. Right now the fuel is gas. It could be hydrogen. And now I'm really going to switch gears. I've been looking at metals and minerals, and I'm looking at the security issues that we're all dealing with, and have talked to Ruslan and the people working on the energy, to Martin, working on the Energy Security Index, need to be looking at the metals and minerals that we need for clean energy technologies. And this is only a US perspective, okay? And the green are metals and minerals for clean energy technologies on which the US is 100% import dependent. The blue is 80 to 96% import dependent. And so from Canada, we're getting graphite. We're 100% import dependent. We're getting 17% of our graphite from Canada. And you can go around the world getting a lot from Mexico, a lot from Peru, Brazil, several places in Africa you can see. Some of them surprised me. I was surprised by South Africa, quite frankly, surprised by India, Vietnam. I mean, some of them were just shocking. The one that wasn't was that one. When you look at China, okay, and we're not alone in competing for those metals and minerals for clean energy technologies. I was surprised Russia did not have that many. Pretty shocking. Also surprised that there's a fair number of them in Europe. Okay, and so that's important for Europe. And we are importing critical metals and minerals for clean energy technologies from Europe. 11% of our tantalum comes from Germany, for example. Belgium is giving us arsenic, I hope nicely, okay? Any rate, I have another slide where I have taken Russia and China out of the equation. Where are we currently importing from with Russia and China not in the equation? Looking at those countries, not knowing whether those countries can actually increase their production, just looking at that they have it, okay, and we are importing. And all of those countries have net zero targets. So at some point in the near future, we are going to be competing with each other for metals and minerals, and we need to develop forums and dialogues to talk with our allies and partners about the supply chains, about the needs, about environmentally responsible mining, about alternatives, about recycling. I'm mildly skeptical on recycling because IEA says by 2040 you can get 9% of the metals and minerals you need for EVs. 9% by 2040. So it's an option, but it's not huge. So at any rate, those are just a few of the energy security issues that I've highlighted, and I wanted to, the other thing on you need a fuel, and we have spent a lot of time on CCS because you need a fuel, and that fuel is gas, okay, right now. We are completely dedicated to net zero. You can't do it with gas without net zero. We always talk about electricity. We never talk about industrial uses. There are no technology options for industrial processes. You need high quality process heat. There's no option for that. You cannot get it from electricity. You need a fuel. That needs CCS. And I just want to close with one. I just want to close, sorry, I was just gesturing. I close with one set of data because I'm a data nerd. This is coal production in the world, 2021. North America, 348 megatons of coal equivalent, 348. Europe, 204. Asia Pacific, 4,216. They're going to use that coal. They need CCS. Climate is a global problem. We need different solutions in different parts of the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you thank you for highlighting some of these issues, which I'm guessing are resonating. Some will be a little bit more controversial. Not quite a question of clarification, but almost. Can I ask one more point? The natural gas imports. When you look at all the projections in Europe, after 2030, the natural gas imports go down the cliff. Where are the economics on LNG? Does that not mean from an energy security perspective we have to build planned stranded assets? We need 10 years gas and then we have the infrastructure. I know people will tell me hydrogen ready and all this, it's great, but you know, we have been hydrogen CCS ready for 25 years. Do we need really to build planned stranded assets? And if yes, so who pays for that? But you don't need to answer that one, just the first one. You know, who pays for that, we give to Radan.
Let me say a couple. Not only looked at the infrastructure for natural gas to hydrogen, but also for CCS to hydrogen. And have been talking to people in the Senate about if you provide a tax credit up front for a CCS pipeline to treat the pipeline as it needs to be treated, you can convert it to a hydrogen pipeline. So you are capturing the carbon in the near term while you are building an infrastructure for a clean hydrogen future. You can do the same with natural gas pipelines. Okay, they just need special treatment because hydrogen embrittles pipes. And so that, in my view, is a way, it's a strong transition incentive, okay, that could be used. And again, natural gas, everyone wants to talk about power generation. Natural gas is important for industry. You need a fuel for industry. Hydrogen could be that fuel too. So marrying up policies for those two infrastructures, I think, gets you to a hydrogen future. It can be blue hydrogen, it can be green hydrogen. There are a lot of limitations on green hydrogen. I'm from New Mexico. We don't have any water in New Mexico. green hydrogen uses huge volumes of water. So, and it's very costly, but countries are going to make their choices based on what they have. I still think you could think about repurposing infrastructure that's going to have a relatively short lifespan to lay the infrastructure that you're going to need in 20, 30 years. So.
Thank you. John, you looked at the recommendations Constanza made. You seem to like them. I don't think they're entirely new to you, but what is your take? So how do we get out of this?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll just build on what Melanie was saying. Very interesting numbers and data, as you said, we saw for LNG. But let's just remember one, that not all European countries have access and can accommodate LNG import in Europe. We still lack what we have achieved in Europe for electricity grid interconnections for gas. We are not interconnected as much in gas. There you go. And number two, US LNG will difficultly, I guess, compensate for the Russian gas. So it cannot be replacing Russian gas, 150, 160 BCM of import. So let's not also think that it's a long-term solution. We need a long-term solution in Europe, but as you were mentioning, it's a short-term measure, US LNG. For the time being, but we are still very much dependent on Russian gas. This is still continuing in Europe. It's a real issue. And we at NATO, of course, we're not an energy organization. We look at energy security from a different perspective, how energy security developments impact our global security environment for our allies. So I'm just going to convey three main messages here. The first one being that energy is very capital intensive and long term. And as Ruslan was mentioning, for example, one decision made on Nabucco impacts decades ahead, which is why decisions we take today will impact the next 20, 30 years. And you were right in pointing out to stranded assets, for example. Do we build more LNG terminals today to end up with stranded assets in 20, 30 years? Or do we have a more interconnected gas pipeline system in Europe? Or do we invest in alternative fossil fuel pipelines, which could be from the Eastern Mediterranean, Israel, from Turkmenistan, again, to Europe, like the Nabucco pipeline? And to build on what you were mentioning on stranded assets, some pipelines are also adapted, accommodate hydrogen, blue hydrogen, for example. If I'm not mistaken, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was built to accommodate in the long term blue hydrogen. If I'm correct. So that's the first point I'll make. Therefore, decisions that we take today are perhaps looking like they're a bit rushed. Negotiations going on between the EU and some energy suppliers for the short term, whether it's LNG, oil, or projects with the US. But in the long term, we need a solution. So of course, yesterday the European Council was suggesting that we implement the 80% storage for our gas reserves in Europe by October, November, this winter. This is critical because at NATO we really see how gas is used for political influence by the Kremlin. So it affects the political and economic resilience of our countries in Europe. And therefore the REPowerEU is, let's say, provides long-term solutions or aims for Europe, but they're not easy to achieve. So we have targets for 2035, we have targets for 2050, but just look at this year, the EU aimed to reduce by 2/3 the gas imports from Russia, and we've already increased that, and we are in June still, or yeah, end of the week will be in July, but it's quite impressive. So we actually have to ask ourselves, are we going to reach these goals, or are we going to blame the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, for not being able to reach them and continue reducing perhaps gas imports from Russia, but still being dependent on Russia for gas for many European countries until we decide to implement, some measures, drastic measures, and allocate capital, which is not the case. For the time being, we still rely on short-term measures, emergency supplies from the Middle East, from the US, but these are not long-term solutions. for our continent, I'll say. So we have to decide if we can afford it, new fossil fuel projects for the next 20, 30 years, particularly for gas as a transition fuel. And also, can we act as one? And this brings me to my last point. This is an area, energy security, and these discussions we have that can divide Europe, that can divide allies, because we, as you mentioned at the beginning, don't depend on Russia at the same level. We have different needs. Bulgaria knows this well. We don't realize that some refineries in Eastern Europe, in Romania, and Bulgaria are dependent on Russian fuel and adapted to that. Who is going to provide the capital to replace that? And as I mentioned, energy is a capital-intensive and long-term sector. So we need to decide if we're going to build new refineries for Bulgaria, for Romania, how we're going to transport new oil, non-Russian oil. And we have to make sure that this does not divide our nations. I think the Netherlands was mentioning yesterday that if European countries have different gas storage levels next winter, we might see the kind of tension that we experienced during the masks and the pandemic, where European countries would be competing with each other for their own reserves. Will there be solidarity? Will there be sharing going on for countries which were unable to fill their gas storages at 80%? So this is a real question we need to ask ourselves and be ready for that. And perhaps this is the aim of the Kremlin and of Gazprom, which has been cutting gas supplies capacity, as you know, Nord Stream 2 and even Turk Stream recently. And look forward to our discussions and new questions.
Thank you, John. No, we have to get used to this new world again, where there are people in the room, you know, the online clapping is just not the same. John, you mentioned it, you know, the devil is in the detail. You know, you have some refinery, they need to be refurbished, and there is new infrastructure, need to be paid for, built, etc., permitted, and all the rest of it. The story, of course, in Portugal, Spain looks very different than in Bulgaria or Turkey. You know, and then you get into solidarity questions. Radan, you know, you becoming too new. I mean, you know, a lot of money has to be spent, and you know, I guess you will be telling us the EU should be spending the money. That's the usual story. We need to do a lot of things, and the EU fund has to be there. They may not be as easy as we have experienced yesterday with the discussion on the social climate fund, etc., etc. So maybe you have also other ideas that the EU pay for all of this. But even if this is the only idea, you know, please feel free to, please, thank you.
Yes, no, it's okay. So the question of financing, of course, came up as crucial one several times. And thank you very much for proposing the idea to once again refer to European budget. Because I have the feeling that ever since I've been in the parliament, so it makes exactly 3 years, the same money has already been designated to like 20 projects for different policies, and it's obviously still there, so we have some magical capacities. But frankly speaking, we have to keep in mind all the time that public money cannot be enough for energy transition, not even for a tenth of what we need about energy transition, and maybe not even for a percent of it. So the clear answer is it's only financial markets and the voluntary participation of financial markets in the transition that could give the answer. And then we go next week in Strasbourg and we vote the taxonomy. And I was very much prepared to talk about taxonomy anyway, without having in mind that you refer to myself about financing. So let's go with what I was prepared, because we have to answer the crucial question: are gas and nuclear sustainable? when it comes to private financial markets, and are they sustainable in the way that the Commission Delegated Act proposes it? And I'm one of the, I would rather say, quite many members of parliament who have not yet decided how we will vote next week. And there are a lot of discussions going on, but I think internal discussions in our heads are much more important than public discussions, because public discussions are very much limited by different populistic narratives that come up, particular national or vested corporate interests as well. Since we are not discussing nuclear today, so I could spare myself this very painful topic and focus on gas, which is much easier basically for me to answer. In my view, if I should say yes or no, as we vote a delegated act with a yes or no, I would say, my God, it's so clear that gas is not sustainable. What is sustainable in gas? The price is extremely volatile and has been for many years now. We have certainly very high levels of dependency, and then it has a lot of CO2 emissions. So it's very short-term perspective. And then with everything we already voted on the ETS file, I unfortunately expect the emissions price, the allowances price, to rise quite sharply with the phase out of free allowances in the years to come. So the price of gas will be even more unpredictable. So it's a very easy choice. And for many of my colleagues, it becomes even more easy when Russia started its aggression in Ukraine. And so since we saw the numbers of our dependence on Russian gas, then simply cutting off gas and deciding it's far from sustainable will be a very easy solution. And then comes Melanie with her numbers and says, yes, but we need it. So there is a very simple answer to taxonomy, and it is that investment in gas is obviously sustainable if it leads to diversification, to competition of supply, to relieving ourselves of one-side dependence on Russia. And here comes the interconnection issue. And is it sustainable to interconnect Spain, which has half the terminal capacity in Europe, with France, which does not? But France is very well connected with the other countries around, and Spain has no connection, real high-capacity connection with France. Obviously, it is sustainable. But then, is this the question that the Commission is putting on the table? Is this what is written in the Delegated Act? Do we have this sustainability criteria? And then, of course, the answer is no, because the act was prepared before the war. And frankly, I don't want to answer questions which were made in highly irrelevant situation. So I still don't have my answer how to vote, but I have the answer what is financially sustainable today.
Thank you. Here is an opportunity to lobby an MEP who hasn't made up his mind. You know, I'm sure people will have some things to say. We would like to go now to the questions and comments to the discussion. First, we would like to take on the online contributions from, are there some questions whom we could report?
Well, yes, we got two questions, and actually one, Radan already started the discussion, nuclear. We cannot avoid discussing it, so the question was addressed to Constanza, but I think all panelists can join the debate. Do we need more nuclear power, especially in light of the 2030 goals, 2050 net zero pledges, because we will need more low carbon electricity? Is nuclear providing low carbon electricity? This is the first question. And the second question, of course, is very timely pressing. So what solidarity measures can we think of in front of the upcoming winter and possible shortages or even cuts of supplies, first of all, of natural gas from Russia?
Okay, thank you. Constanza, if you could hold for a second, I would like to also offer the opportunity for others to speak up. And then I also should say, if you want to comment on any of your other panelists, that would be the moment as well. Are there any questions in the room? There are two more. And in between, I should say that on the original program, Maria Pastakova was also on the program. Unfortunately, she is ill and she could come make her way from Berlin.
Hello, good morning. Sibren de Jong, analyst Eastern Europe over at NATO Supreme Headquarters, SHAPE. So I'm actually one of John's colleagues, just for clarification here. I got two questions. So on the one hand, the G7 has announced, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, that they're looking into implementing a so-called oil price cap. Now, I would like to pick your brain as to the feasibility thereof, and please, when you answer also, if you could elaborate on what they suggested on using insurance companies to sort of insist that they don't insure oil over a certain price. That would be very good. Second question is not for everyone, but directed specifically at Constanza. I would like to know what kind of legislation do you think European countries should develop when you look at countering all the types of Russian influence that you so neatly prescribed in that very cool graph? Bear in mind that when you look at the energy security implications of the various cutoffs in 2009 and also in 2014 and all the rest of it, in Western Europe, that didn't really hit home. So there is a big difference with today, and I guess the affordability argument has kind of finally made them wake up. So yeah, if you could elaborate on that, thanks very much.
Thank you. And there was one more, and then we give the floor back to you. Very good questions. And if you try to escape them, I try to insist.
Good morning all. Can Ercan, Energy Counselor from Turkish delegation to the EU, based in Brussels. I know Can Bey from his earlier career. Congratulations for this panel. So two quick questions. First, nuclear. We know that there are two tectonic moves in terms of nuclear. One, Chernobyl, and the other one is Fukushima. And after Fukushima, nuclear is nothing same in nuclear. So we have small modular nuclear reactor technology. And EU, particularly UK and US, is competing. So what would you say about this new nuclear technology? Do you think there is a future in Europe or globally? Second question, after the unfortunate events in Ukraine, we have a new geopolitical landscape in Europe, particularly in terms of new suppliers and new supply routes, because gas is now out. We now have green hydrogen and hydrogen to be built upon in the next decades. So then in the new landscape of geopolitics, do you believe new players, particularly Africa and North Africa and Eastern and Mediterranean partners, would increase the vulnerability or resilience of geopolitics, energy geopolitics of Europe, or would it be a value-added change in terms of energy geopolitics for Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. The most questions initial has been to you, but I think there is enough for everybody to keep us going until 11:30 easily. Constanza, could we first deal with the nuclear one and conclude that, because this is an evergreen, we could go until this evening. Let's do the nuclear, and then, you start, and then the others comment on it, and let's put it to bed, and then we go to the next questions.
Sounds good. Nuclear is definitely a very tricky question. When we assessed nuclear in the index, we considered it as part of the sustainability solution. So countries with nuclear capacity have higher share of low carbon electricity in their energy mix. But at the same time, we are seeing how in France, nuclear is in big trouble at the moment, and at the same time we have the issue of flexibility, because nuclear is not necessarily a very good flexible asset that can tackle the variability of renewables such as wind and solar. And the other thing is, how fast can you actually build up nuclear? Because what we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years in Europe in terms of new nuclear energy projects, most of them have been 5 to 10, even some of them 15 years late. We recently saw the latest nuclear energy projects in Finland finally coming online with a 15-year delay, and I don't know how many times over its initial costs. So the question is, can we really use nuclear and can we rebuild the engineering capacity and really use this as a solution? Because we're facing a very immediate problem right now in terms of energy supply and energy security issues, and potentially nuclear could be a little bit too late in helping us solve what we currently have in terms of problems. So that's what I have to say.
Anybody else on the nuclear? Yes, everybody. Okay, I expected that. And then I have the last word.
The nuclear clearly has its problems, and you could have been talking about a reactor in the United States that's $30 billion over budget and years behind schedule, and quite frankly, the U.S. workforce has forgotten how to build nuclear reactors. I think that's a big part of it, but we are looking very closely at small modular reactors and deploying them over time. And quite frankly, in my view, all of these breakthrough technologies that we're going to need, they're not immediate. They're not immediate. You're going to, the small modular reactor is going to take 5-10 years to deploy. Blue hydrogen, green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is a huge issue, okay? I can go into details with that, but and in the US, I don't know about here, they're talking about using curtailed renewables for their green hydrogen. That gives you a capacity factor for something that is essential for our industrial sector, a capacity factor of 10%. It's inadequate, okay? It's inadequate for the industrial sector. It's inadequate to be used as an energy commodity and a fuel when you've got a 10% capacity factor. And so there are a whole range of near-term issues. We've got to do what we can in the near term. Efficiency, conservation.
Could we stay with the nuclear? We come back to all the other issues.
I was on my high horse.
We'll come back to the blue hydrogen, the green hydrogen, and the capacity factor electrolyzers, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll just build on what Melanie was mentioning. I think that Ukraine is a real game changer for nuclear energy, in Europe particularly. And as we move forward, I also think that we are moving into an energy world where we would have a table of tapas, let's say, of energy. You need nuclear, you need hydrogen, you need renewables. So this is the new, maybe more resilient or perhaps more vulnerable energy landscape we are transitioning into, with small diversified energy sources, whether it's nuclear or other, they become more valuable. So of course, as Constanza mentioned, the costs are going very high for nuclear energy, maybe higher than renewables. And she also highlighted how lengthy it is, so that's problematic. It's not a short-term solution. It takes decades. Costs always double, triple, a lot of logistical, structural, financial problems. However, nuclear, in a world where we have to quickly go into the energy transition, I say quickly because Russia forced us into this costly and faster energy transition. In this world, we need all kinds of diversification for energy source. And nuclear, whether it's costly or lengthy, is one of those tapas elements, let's say, and provides secure supply of energy. And the fact that new generation nuclear power plants have higher standards since Fukushima, since Chernobyl means higher costs, of course, higher standards, but long-term secure supply with new technology, which may be safer with small modular reactors. I'll just move on. Radan?
Yeah, Radan here, he put just the ball for you to kick into the net. There is not a single investment bank which has a nuclear desk because the private finance is not just made for that.
And I think it won't be. Never mind what we vote next week on the taxonomy once again. I don't think that private financial market will be happy with nuclear, which makes the future of nuclear even more dubious, especially on the long run. I share what my colleagues basically said. We obviously cannot live without what we have as nuclear capacity now. And it's not for a while, it's not for 5 years to come, for sure. And on the other hand, we obviously face challenges that we as policymakers and the financial players to have no answers, especially that, let's say, latest safety standards are always going ahead of the construction process. Since Finland is extremely anxious about safety and environment, it was a really very good case study that their safety board for their nuclear project went always a couple of years ahead of the construction, and they had new safety requirements each next 2 years, and they hardly made it at the end of the day. And one last thing, coming back to taxonomy, I'm sorry, I'm so critical about the European Commission today. I love them otherwise. But the concept...
You will have enough time to meet them in the trilogues in September onwards, you know, and to express that.
But the concept of nuclear, and especially not new nuclear technologies like small reactor, but existing basic technologies, the concept of these technologies as transitional solution is one of the stupidest things I ever heard in my life, not only as a politician, you know. Something which takes like 30 years to build, as we see, and which leaves a footprint for maybe several hundred thousands of years after it, could be anything. It could be needed or not needed. It could be sustainable or not sustainable. But transitional is the one thing it cannot be.
Thank you. We managed the nuclear question in 10 minutes, which is probably record for this town. So thank you all for this.
Yeah, Christian, if I just may intervene and to complicate the life of panelists a bit more.
But not on nuclear.
On nuclear, we get more and more questions from our online audience, and maybe just a short comment on the decision of Germany not to extend the lifetime of nuclear power plants, despite being exposed so much to the dependence on Russian gas.
Irina, I'm really, you know, it will go on forever. We're having more comments and more questions on nuclear. Let us go, Melanie and John, if you allow me. You know, there was these questions by Sibrin about the oil, the ceiling. You know, the question was, can this work? How can this work? You know, Melanie, you know, what has been discussed at the G7. Any views on this? And John?
Oil?
No, yeah, on the oil, the ceiling, on the oil price.
Oil price. I don't know what's happening from day to day. I mean, I think that Russia is making a huge amount of money producing less oil, but making a fortune. And so it's not necessarily in their interest right now. I don't know how rapidly we can increase oil production. I'm leaving from here to Saudi Arabia. I will ask them, okay? And I don't think there's a lot of spare capacity in the world for increased production right now. And so I think that things like conservation and efficiency become much more important for driving, et cetera, et cetera. And I just think that we're going to see instability, and I don't see things going down for a while. But I was wrong yesterday. I could be wrong tomorrow, and it's just a very weird time. I've been looking at the numbers, and I don't think there's a capacity. So
We all broke our records of being wrong in very short periods. John, hope.
Yes, so for the oil price cap, number one, it is a buildup, let's say, part of sanctions on Russian energy. So we started with coal, which we sanctioned in August. We moved to Russian oil ban, which only includes seaborne oil, Russian oil ban. So an insufficient or inadequate, let's say, ban on Russian oil, which doesn't include pipeline oil. And perhaps the effects of this were not as, let's say, impactful as wished by the EU, which justified new measures. And so the oil price cap, which whose details we don't actually know yet because it's under discussions. So they're tricky measures. I'm very curious to know about them also because we haven't seen this in the past. Of course, it's in the interest of the Europeans to curb inflation, economic problems in Europe, and it's
Americans too.
of course, globally, it's a real problem, aggravating inflation, and it perhaps will help Russia's money cushions to be reduced if Europeans can have this price cap. But do Europeans determine how much oil revenue Russians will have? Will the oil price globally, market price, come down from this? We don't know. I think it's uncharted territory, and we will see later this week how it goes. But I think it's part of this efforts by the EU to curb, of course, the Kremlin's financing the war in Ukraine, and part of the global efforts to sanction energy, Russian energy. We can't do it for gas yet. We can't do it for pipeline from oil pipeline from Russia, and we're faced with a situation where we actually import Russian oil into Europe, in the sense that, let's look at India, for example, exporting to Europe refined petroleum products, 60% of which come from Russia. So is it actually Indian oil or Russian oil? This is the really tricky part that EU is trying to address, let's say, with new measures like the oil price cap. Do you want to add?
If I could just say the administration in the U.S. has already talked to the oil and gas companies, the CEOs of the oil companies, and I think that they need to bring in the CEOs of the oil companies and the investors who are telling them to give the profits to the shareholders, not increase production. And so a little jawboning of the investment community in this regard, I think, might have some result, be important too.
Thank you. So, Sibren, not yet an answer. We need further analysis on this. Now, we have 15 minutes left, and also know Melanie needs to leave quite sharply. So maybe, you all pick the questions which are the most difficult to answer and try to answer them. There was a couple of them to Constanza, and then we just go, just a normal way. Please.
Thank you. There was a question about legislation and how do we tackle Russia's foreign economic and political influence. What measures can we take? Of course, you would have to read the Kremlin playbook to know the details, but what is really key is more transparency. So we do need investment screening. We need to track ultimate beneficial ownership of companies. We do have to have a policy approach that does not accommodate joint projects between European and Russian energy companies. So we do need to have a clear strategy that says what is European energy security, and are these projects part of this energy security strategy, or are they accommodating Russia's energy strategy? So we need both transparency and legislation, better monitoring and control, but at the same time we need a policy approach that clearly defines what is European energy security and what projects are part of it and what are not. Thank you. And there was also a question about North Africa and vulnerabilities that could come from that. And the index actually shows that on the global level, irrespective of what every country is doing, we have something that tracks the overall security of natural gas, oil, and coal production and reserves. And the risk has been constantly increasing over the last several years because oil and gas are increasingly being concentrated in the hands of several authoritarian states, of course the US being one of the few exceptions, but overall these resources are being concentrated in authoritarian states that are very difficult to deal with. And we do have to face this inherent geopolitical risk that is linked to fossil fuels.
Yeah.
I'm going to give some generic questions about energy security and say that I think that what this has shown, and everyone in this room is deeply committed to net zero, but that we need very, very thoughtful, sequenced policies to get there. Every country in the world depends on oil and gas. We are all seeing that right now. And we have to be mindful of that in our policies for deep decarbonization. And something else that I have come to appreciate working on the issues in this crisis is that the EU is not unlike the US, where the solutions and pathways to getting to net zero are very different for different countries and regions in the EU. That's just like it is in the United States. And the coal generation in the Ohio River Valley, and it's where we use a lot of our hydrogen as well, is very, very different than where I am in New Mexico, where we have a lot of sun, but no water. And so green hydrogen is really not an option there. And so I just think that more flexibility for different countries and different regions, and flexibility about the pathways to get there, acknowledging that we do have to deal with the energy security issues in a strong and positive way that provides the energy that our citizens need. And if we don't, we will build opposition to climate change, which I think is exactly the wrong way to go. So.
Yes, very good points. I'll just add on the question of new energy players globally. I think it's important that we realize that in the post-Russia energy world and energy transition, electrostates will emerge, just like we had petrol states. And the most important one that we're looking at in NATO also is China. The challenge that it poses. Melanie, you were talking about the 80% or 90% reliance on China for rare earths and other metals. Europe also needs to realize that if we transition into electric cars by 2035, I think, the decision has been taken in the EU. Batteries, if they're not produced in Europe, they will come from China. Our wind turbines, our solar panels, they all come from China, majority at least. And they're made with oil. So these electrostates could become the next petrostates, new energy players for the world. But unlike, let's say, the Middle East and Latin American oil producers, there's only one electrostate for the time being, a gigantic one, very dominant, China. And we could fall into the same trap with China as we did in the 20th century with Russia, for example. So this energy transition where we are rushing things because of Russia. Russia is forcing us to move fast in our energy transition, and we might forget or be blinded simply that we might fall into another one's lap, which could be China. Secondly, it's very interesting to see that energy projects are being discussed in the Eastern Mediterranean between Israel, Gulf countries, even potentially Saudi Arabia. So it's quite the possibility, I would say, for Israel to emerge as an important energy player for the European market, not only because of its own resources, not only because of Egypt also, but because it could be the gateway for Gulf energy resources, which could match Russia's, unlike the US. Therefore, I think that's quite an ambitious and very amazing turn of events that we see in the Eastern Mediterranean, whereby if the Gulf could be connected through Saudi Arabia to Israel, then the Gulf could be also an exporter to Europe. Currently, they export mostly to Asia, as costs are lower and due to proximity, but they would come very close to Europe if they can be connected to Israel. So this is, I think, part of the discussions they're having since the Abraham Accords, and energy, technology, and defense are the main areas being discussed between Israel and these Gulf countries. So these are the 2 points I wanted to highlight: China for electrostate and potential new fossil fuel exporters that we didn't imagine could be possible.
Thank you. And I think everything being said, I have a difficult task now to fill 5 more minutes. But I could easily try to answer the question on German nuclear political decisions, but I think it's very much into politics, and we're not really talking politics now, exactly being political decision. But for Melanie, for the first time, surprisingly, this morning I heard the C word, coal, and we have it even on our agenda, and I'm surprised there was no question from the audience, because the issue of few European countries, and namely Germany and Austria, very environmentally anxious, as we see from the nuclear case, reopened massively coal production. On the other hand, in my own country, in Bulgaria, coal production was on profit for the first time ever, I would say. I don't think they ever made real economic profits, and now they did. They paid off some debts that were obviously eternal and unpayable, and now they're not only making profit but economically like clean for the first time in history, and it's a very big question mark. What happens next? Because it's obviously the worst we can do from point of view of our climate ambition. On the other hand, we have Germany closing nuclear, opening coal. It goes, frankly, directly any climate ambition as a philosophy, but it's obviously politically more acceptable for the public than the other way around. And here I would only put it like this. A couple of years ago, or even 1 year ago, it was obvious that we are closing coal power plants as soon as possible, and it was perceived as a great step ahead by a majority and as a tragedy by a minority. Of course, differing from country to country. In Bulgaria, it was maybe the other way around. And now we have coal plants reopening, and it's perceived by relief for a minority and a tragedy for a majority. And what I would argue is that it's none of it. And we must understand that coal will be there, maybe just as a crisis reserve, maybe just as a military time reserve, wartime reserve. But it will be there. It will be always too expensive, but it will be always a very feasible option to go on.
So, thank you all. We are almost at the end. Before, I would like to thank you, just a few comments I mean, I found it, fascinating discussions. We've all find ourselves in a very new world, and we have realized there are no easy short-term solutions. We all knew this one, but I think the beauty of it is that the European Green Deal has landed in reality, and we policymakers will need to face lot of trade-offs, deal with fallacies, and that is the job of it. So I would see a lot of politics getting there, especially around the issue of who pays for these short-term measures. They will be very expensive, and I'm afraid, Radan, the European budget, member states' budget, will have to carry a lot of this. Now, on the longer term, things take time. I think we all know this, but the investability will really be the question which decides what are we going to do. We can have all great ideas, be it CCS, being green hydrogen, being nuclear, being whatever. In the end of the day, somebody will have to invest it. That will be public money, private money, sorry, it will be private money. And if the business case is not there, but that puts an extra onus on the policymakers, Radan, to get a good regulation, good policy, if this is sort of not dealing with these trade-offs, which many of them are very nasty. If they're not trading with these trade-offs, you're not going to get this, and the money will not flow, and we will having the same discussions in 5 years with the same arguments. Now, I would just like to finish with 2 more questions. One is really what struggles me, what I'm struggling with is, what does this new world, John, I look to you, NATO, what does this new world really means for global climate policy, for global climate carbon pricing, for national carbon pricing, climate clubs, whatever we discuss? It's really striking what concepts we still seem to be discussing, which seem to be predating the 24th of February. And finally, really the last question, we still could not answer the question whether natural gas is sustainable or not, and we couldn't really help Radan in his decision-making process. But I'm sure you will cast the vote on the right side in the end. So thank you all. Thank you all for joining, participating in the debate, and a great thanks to all the speakers to having come today to this joint meeting by CSD and CEPS. Thank you.